Hi, I'm Micah Metz with World Gospel Mission, and I'm here with Holly Muehleisen from Japan, World Gospel Mission. Holly, thank you for joining me.
No problem, Micah.
Could you share with our viewers just a little bit about what ministry you're doing, what that looks like in Japan?
Here in Japan, I primarily partner with a Japanese denomination we work with called Emmanuel General Mission. And that can look like anything from doing a Sunday morning message in English with translation or in Japanese or a children's ministry outreach. But the biggest thing I'm involved with is something that we call Fun English, which is an outreach, a way to reach out, build relationships with the neighborhoods, especially to those people in the community who may not know a Christian or have never interacted with one on a casual basis, let alone come to a church service. So it's kind of a safe place to just kind of bless the community and get to know families through English.
Great. That's really cool. Now, we were talking before the call about quarantine, and you were filling me in on some stuff I had no idea about. Can you share a little bit about what quarantine looks like in Japan?
Yeah, it's been a little bit different here than what people have seen in other countries with major lockdowns. Japan has been dealing with it towards the front end. I first heard about this in early to mid-January, and by end of January, masks and sanitizer were already selling out in this country because we're so close and we had so many Chinese tourists. People were already being very careful and cautious. But it wasn't until the end of February that the government announced that the schools will be closing, and it wasn't until the middle of March that they announced a state of emergency. Now, that does not mean quarantine.
Okay.
They are legally not allowed because of the Constitution that was signed after World War II. They are not allowed to require people to stay home. They can just urge and ask people. And so that's what they have been doing, asking people as much as possible to stay home, to reduce contact, and those kinds of things. Yeah, for those of us especially who are involved with ministry with the churches, different churches have responded in different ways. But when the schools closed, all my fun English classes closed. If you don't want the kids gathering at schools, you don't want them gathering at a church. And they don't want to be known as the group that, they kept meeting and spread disease.
Yeah.
So most of the churches, I will say the churches closed probably with a state of emergency for the most part. But before that, most of the churches had already gone to much more strict guidelines. For example, you walk in to any store at the beginning of middle February and especially into March, and you're going to see hand sanitizer at the door. I did my last message at a church the first weekend in March, and I had my afternoon special event canceled at the church. They usually eat at the church. That was canceled. All we did was worship in the morning, and I had to wear a mask the whole time, including preaching.
Wow.
It's a small church, a lot of older people, and so highly vulnerable population, and so the churches are really trying to do their best to protect their constituents, their church members. And so that's been a little tricky. As things have gone on, most of the churches here have gone to some form of long distance online worship service. Although last week I just finished writing a message for that same little church where I preached with the mask. I was hoping to go back and see them again in person. Hopefully this would have all been cleared up by now as we were planning our schedule. Well, I ended up having to type a message because that church is not super tech savvy. So the pastor goes in every Wednesday with the message, prints it off, and mails it out to all the church members on the mailing list. Other churches post an online worship service through Facebook or Zoom or one of those other online platforms. The church here in the neighborhood, they do actually a recorded message that you can listen to online. Zach Motz, one of our other missionaries, he preached on Zoom this past Sunday. So there's a variety of ways that churches are doing their best to try and reach out. But again, as many people know, Zoom is wasn't designed for worship services.
No.
So there's been some interesting ways of people trying to be creative and using that for worship.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've seen some creative ways myself.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not optimal. It's not how we normally communicate and interact with each other. And
yep.
I'm sure.
And it's a big challenge, especially because we want to encourage each other in this time to be together.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I'm sure that the people that are receiving written messages in the mail, as opposed to some type of interaction, even on a screen, they're probably really hurting right now for some connection. Uh,
Yeah, I
Another
know one of our
person.
other missionaries, Brandon Kuba, who's down with his wife in Shimonoseki. That's one of the struggles that they have, is that people want to meet and want to be together, and they're having to decide, do we stay open? Do we do some kind of like open hours? Do we have a worship service this week? Or maybe we don't have a worship service and do something online, but maybe we can have prayer meeting where smaller groups come in, or a Bible study, and constantly making those decisions, especially because the area that they're in doesn't have as many cases. They have more flexibility to do that. Here in Tokyo, we're kind of one of the centers of outbreak, so people are being much more cautious about meeting physically in person.
Well, that's great to know. As supporters are watching this and hearing some of the difficulties, how can they be praying? How can they be supporting the Japan field right now, and you
Yeah,
specifically?
well, especially here in Japan, we do have a very vulnerable at-risk population. We have large numbers of elderly people. The churches are largely filled with the elderly people, those who are a little bit older. Um, the Japanese have tended to be a long-lived population, so this is a very big thing that could be devastating potentially. But especially for those pastors who are older, who are struggling to make the leap to online or doing something, and they're trying to learn new skills in the midst of all this and comfort their flocks, be in prayer for that. Um, I guess just for safety, we haven't had as many deaths in this country as some of the other countries in Europe, for example, or even the US have had. But we still don't know what's going to happen in the days to come. That could change very rapidly at any moment. I guess the biggest prayer request for me personally, I work with so many pastors to do this fun English outreach. And so it's been kind of a struggle of, what do I do
Mhm.
when you can't meet in person to teach English, when you can't be an encouragement, when you have kids who aren't able to go to school because their schools are closed and there's no level of normal in their daily lives, and they miss hanging out with their friends, and they miss class and their teachers and all of that. Um, One of the churches has started back. In fact, tomorrow morning I'll be getting up to do a Zoom fun English. So we have an hour on Tuesday morning and an hour on Tuesday afternoon, twice a month. Other churches don't have that technological ability, and so I've kind of come up with a little blog to help send out to those pastors and help them out, just to let them know we haven't forgotten them, that even though we're not able to meet in person, we're still thinking about them, we're praying for them, we want what's best for them, to somehow be a blessing in this time of
Yeah.
stress for a lot of these moms and these families that we work with. Um, but yeah, it's hard to not be able to do something. Some other countries, there's ways that they can leap into action and do more physical things, and that's hard when, like you all in the States, for being asked to stay home and
Yeah.
not go anywhere, especially because here in Tokyo, it's public transport.
Hmm.
So,
No, that's really good to know, and I hope that the supporters listening and watching feel challenged to lift up you in Japan in prayer. And I've heard before, and hopefully I'll hear again, about how God is using a time of extreme isolation to expand His church.
that
Um,
is another huge request. Yes, thank you for saying that. My big prayer that they could share with their neighbors who are in the midst of a very difficult situation,
mhm,
stressed, concerned about this disease and this pandemic that's just racing around the world and afraid it might come and hit their neighborhood next.
yeah.
That we'd be able to be an encouragement and have the hope that Christ gives us.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing a little bit about what's going on.
Thank you, Micah. Appreciate you asking.